The winter sun hung low over Boston Harbor, casting pale light through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Montgomery Financial Group's penthouse offices. Vincent Montgomery stood at his mahogany desk, reviewing quarterly reports that confirmed what he already knew. His hedge fund had just closed its most profitable year in its 15-year history. At 39 years old, he had built something remarkable from almost nothing, transforming a small inheritance and relentless ambition into a financial empire managing $8 billion in assets. The Montgomery name appeared on donor walls at the Symphony, the museum, the hospital. Yet none of those accomplishments meant as much to him as knowing his mother Helen lived comfortably in the carriage house behind his Beacon Hill townhouse. Helen Montgomery had raised Vincent alone in a cramped apartment in Dorchester. After his father abandoned them when Vincent was 7 years old, she had worked as a seamstress, her fingers bleeding from needle pricks, as she took in alterations and repairs to pay for Catholic school tuition she couldn't really afford. She never spoke bitterly about his father, never burdened Vincent with her struggles. Now, at 70 years old, she occupied the renovated carriage house Vincent had meticulously restored for her, a cozy 2-bedroom sanctuary, with a small kitchen, where she still insisted on baking the Irish soda bread of her childhood. Her dark hair had turned pure white, which she wore in a simple braid, and her blue-gray eyes still sparkled when she laughed, though Vincent noticed she laughed less frequently these days. Olivia Drake had entered Vincent's world 2.5 years ago at a charity auction in Newport. She was stunning, 31 years old, with honey blonde hair that fell in artful waves, amber eyes that caught light like whiskey and crystal, and the kind of effortless elegance that came from generations of old money. Her family name appeared in social register. Her boarding school connections opened doors Vincent's wealth alone couldn't. She worked in art advisory, but Vincent had never been entirely clear on what that actually entailed beyond attending gallery openings and museum benefits. Olivia had made him feel like he finally belonged in circles that had once seemed impenetrable, like his working-class origins could be polished away. 9 months ago he had proposed with his grandmother's engagement ring, a 3-carat diamond Helen had worn for 37 years of marriage, and Olivia had accepted with practiced grace. The wedding was planned for May, a sophisticated affair at the public garden, with 175 carefully curated guests. Everything appeared impeccable. Vincent had the success, the social acceptance, the beautiful fiancée from the right family, and his mother living safely nearby. He congratulated himself on having transcended his humble beginnings so completely. If only he had paid closer attention, he might have noticed the rot beneath the gleaming surface. Helen sat in the carriage house living room, her hands trembling as she folded laundry. The bruise on her ribs had faded to a sickly yellow, hidden beneath her cardigan. She glanced nervously at the window overlooking the courtyard, watching for any sign of Olivia's silver Audi. Olivia had left for a lunch meeting 3 hours ago, but Helen never knew when she might return unexpectedly. The fear had become constant, a cold weight in her chest that made breathing difficult. It had begun slowly, perhaps 7 or 8 months after the engagement. Initially, just cutting remarks, comments about how Helen's accent was so ethnic, how her clothes were charmingly thrift store, how it must be difficult to understand complex social dynamics with her limited education. Helen had tried to ignore it, telling herself Olivia was stressed about wedding planning, or adjusting to the idea of having a mother-in-law. But the verbal cruelty had escalated into physical violence. The first time Olivia had actually struck her, Helen had been so shocked, she couldn't even cry out. It happened in Vincent's kitchen, when Helen had accidentally used one of Olivia's expensive Japanese knives to cut vegetables for soup. Olivia had grabbed Helen's wrist and twisted it viciously, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper as she explained that Helen's peasant hands shouldn't touch things that cost more than she had probably earned in a month of sewing. When Helen had tried to apologize, Olivia had slapped her not hard enough to leave a visible mark, but hard enough to make Helen's ears ring. Since that day, the attacks had multiplied. A shove here, a pinch there, always when Vincent was at work or traveling for business. Once, Olivia had pushed Helen down the carriage house stairs, causing bruises Helen had explained away as a simple fall. Another time, Olivia had grabbed a handful of Helen's hair and yanked her head back, warning her that after the wedding, Vincent would be convinced to move Helen to a retirement home, where she belonged. Olivia had perfected the performance of the devoted future daughter-in-law. In Vincent's presence, she asked Helen's opinion on wedding details, brought her tea, even suggested they go shopping together. But the moment Vincent's back was turned, Olivia's mask would slip, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. Helen had tried to convince herself she was overreacting, that perhaps she had somehow provoked these incidents. But she knew the truth. Olivia didn't love Vincent. She loved what he represented: access to wealth without the taint of new money, a husband whose success could fund her lifestyle, while her family name provided the social credentials he craved. Helen was an inconvenient reminder of Vincent's origins, evidence that he wasn't truly one of them, no matter how much money he made. And Helen, who had sacrificed everything for her son, couldn't bear the thought of destroying his happiness by exposing the woman he was so proud to marry. So she remained silent, absorbing the abuse in private, inventing explanations for injuries. Vincent occasionally noticed. She told him she was clumsy, that she forgot her own strength, that old age made her fragile. He believed her because he was so busy, so consumed with proving himself in circles that would never fully accept him, that he didn't look closely enough to see the truth. Vincent returned to the townhouse that evening in excellent spirits. He had just orchestrated a complex merger that would net his firm $20 million in fees and cement his reputation as one of Boston's shrewdest financial minds. He found Olivia in the sitting room, perfectly composed with a martini, looking like she belonged in a Slim Aaron's photograph. She smiled warmly when he entered, rising to kiss him in a way that suggested celebration later. They discussed wedding details over dinner prepared by his private chef. Olivia wanted to upgrade the floral arrangements again and add a second band for the reception. Another $15,000 to an already extravagant budget. Vincent agreed absently, his mind on the merger details. He asked about his mother, and Olivia assured him that Helen had been puttering around in the carriage house all day, had declined dinner, seemed perfectly content. Vincent felt a pang of guilt that he hadn't checked on Helen himself in 3 days, but he pushed it aside, telling himself she was fine, she had everything she needed. What Vincent didn't see was the incident that had occurred just 2 hours before his arrival. Helen had been in the main house, returning a book she had borrowed from Vincent's library, when she accidentally walked in on Olivia on the phone, clearly arguing with someone about money. When Olivia had realized Helen was there, she had ended the call and turned on her with fury. She had grabbed Helen by the throat and slammed her against the bookshelf, accusing her of spying, of trying to sabotage the wedding. When Helen had gasped that she was just returning a book, Olivia had thrown her to the floor and kicked her in the ribs, hissing that if Helen ever told Vincent anything, she would make sure he believed his mother was developing dementia. Helen had crawled back to the carriage house, her ribs screaming with pain, her throat bruised. She had locked the door and lain on her bed, crying silently so Vincent wouldn't hear if he came home. From her window, she had watched his Tesla pull into the private garage, and her heart had broken. Her son looked so satisfied, so successful, so unaware that the woman he loved was a monster. Weeks passed, and Vincent remained oblivious. His firm was in expansion mode, hiring new analysts, opening a London office, fielding interest from institutional investors. Olivia encouraged his ambition, insisted she could handle all the wedding planning herself, suggested Helen probably preferred her solitude anyway. Vincent trusted her completely, grateful that she seemed to respect his mother's independence while ensuring everything stayed on track. The reality was very different. With Vincent consumed by work, Olivia's treatment of Helen intensified. She would let herself into the carriage house uninvited, criticizing how Helen kept it, mocking the religious icons Helen had brought from her old apartment, making it clear that all of this, the carriage house, the security, the proximity to Vincent, would end as soon as they were married. She told Helen explicitly that she would convince Vincent his mother needed professional care, that keeping her around was holding him back socially, that people talked about his immigrant mother behind his back. Helen's spirit began to break. She stopped going to daily mass, something she hadn't missed in 50 years. She lost weight, her appetite disappearing along with her will to resist. The light in her blue-gray eyes dimmed, replaced by constant vigilance. When Vincent was home, she forced smiles and insisted everything was wonderful, but the effort exhausted her. One particularly cruel afternoon, Olivia had found Helen looking at old pictures of Vincent's first communion, his high school graduation, the day he'd started his own firm. Olivia had snatched them away and ripped several in half, telling Helen that Vincent's real life started when he became successful, that everything before was just poverty and struggle he wanted to forget. She had held a lighter to one photo, threatening to burn them all unless Helen learned her place. Those actions had cut deeper than any physical pain. Helen had given everything to ensure Vincent's success, her youth, her health, any chance at her own happiness. She had worked until her hands bled and her back permanently ached. And now this woman who had contributed nothing, who valued only Vincent's money and status, was trying to erase it all, to pretend Vincent had sprung fully formed into Olivia's world, with no history, no mother, no past. Yet Helen still said nothing. Her love for Vincent was absolute, and she had convinced herself that his happiness mattered more than her suffering. She told herself that maybe once they were married, once Olivia felt secure, the cruelty might stop. It was a desperate, foolish hope, but it was all she had. But sometimes the universe intervenes in unexpected ways, and truth has a way of forcing itself into the light. Vincent had scheduled a business trip to New York. Crucial meetings with potential investors for the London office. He had kissed Olivia goodbye that morning, reminded her to check on his mother, and taken the early Acela Express. His meetings were scheduled for the full day, and he had planned to stay overnight at his club. What Olivia didn't know was that the lead investor had suffered a family emergency and canceled within an hour of Vincent's arrival. The other meetings weren't critical enough to justify staying, and Vincent, uncharacteristically, decided to return home early. He caught the 3 o'clock train back to Boston, arriving at South Station by 7 hours earlier than anyone expected. He decided not to call ahead, thinking he might surprise Olivia with dinner at that new restaurant she'd been wanting to try. As his car approached Beacon Hill, he felt unusually relaxed, looking forward to an unexpected evening at home. Olivia's Audi was parked in front of the townhouse, so he knew she was there. He smiled, imagining her surprise. Vincent entered through the front door, calling out a greeting. Silence. The house felt strangely empty, though lights were on. He set down his briefcase and started toward the kitchen, thinking perhaps Olivia was in the garden. But then he heard something that made him freeze, a voice, strained and frightened, coming from the direction of the carriage house. He could see through the courtyard window that the carriage house door was open, light spilling out. He moved quickly across the courtyard, his instincts telling him something was very wrong. As he approached, he could hear Olivia's voice, sharp and vicious, saying something about pathetic and burden. Then he heard his mother's voice, but not like he had ever heard it before. She was begging, actually begging, saying, "Please, I'll stay out of the way. I promise." Vincent reached the doorway, and the scene before him would be seared into his memory forever. Olivia had his mother cornered in the small kitchen, and she had just slapped Helen across the face hard enough that Helen's head snapped to the side. His mother's cheek was already reddening, tears streaming down her face, and she was pressed back against the counter, as if trying to disappear into it. The shock lasted only seconds before it transformed into rage. Pure, incandescent rage, unlike anything Vincent had ever experienced. He had built his career on controlling his emotions, on calculated decisions and strategic thinking, but seeing his mother, his gentle, kind mother who had given everything for him, being struck by the woman he had planned to marry, shattered something fundamental in him. Vincent's voice, when he found it, was barely above a whisper. "Get away from her." Just 4 words, but they carried enough menace to make Olivia spin around, her hands still raised from the slap. Her face cycled rapidly through emotions, shock, fear, then calculation as her mind raced for an explanation. Vincent, thank God you're home. Your mother has been having one of her episodes. Get away from her. Vincent's voice was still quiet, still controlled, but something in his eyes made Olivia take a step back. He moved past her without another glance, going directly to Helen. His mother was shaking violently, one hand pressed to her reddened cheek, and when she looked up at him, he saw something in her eyes he had never seen before: abject terror, but also relief, and underneath it all, a crushing shame. "Mom," he said gently, and at the tenderness in his voice, Helen's face crumpled, and she began to sob. Vincent helped her to a chair, noting with growing horror how she flinched when he reached toward her, how she seemed to expect more violence. He knelt beside her chair, and that's when he saw them, bruises on her wrists in various stages of healing, the way she held her ribs as if they hurt, the mark on her throat that looked like fingerprints. "How long?" he asked quietly, still looking at his mother. Helen couldn't speak, could only shake her head, tears flowing freely. Vincent finally turned to look at Olivia, and what he saw in her face confirmed everything. She had already pivoted to her defense, her expression shifting to concern, to confusion, preparing her lie, but Vincent had seen what he saw, and more importantly, he finally understood what he had been too blind to see for months: the weight loss, the withdrawn behavior, the way his mother had stopped calling him, stopped asking him to visit. "She's been acting so strangely lately," Olivia started, her voice taking on a practiced tone of worried concern. "I think she might be developing dementia or—" "Stop." Vincent stood slowly, his height and presence suddenly filling the small kitchen. "I saw what you did. I heard what you said to her. And judging by these bruises, this isn't the first time." Olivia's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing cold anger underneath. "She's manipulating you, Vincent. Can't you see that? She's never accepted me. She's always been threatened by our relationship." "Is that true, Mom?" Vincent asked, never taking his eyes off Olivia. "Have you been threatened by my relationship?" Helen looked up at her son, at the man she had sacrificed everything for, and finally found her voice. "I'm scared of her," she whispered. "I've been scared for months. But I didn't want to ruin your happiness." Those words hit Vincent like a physical blow. His mother had endured abuse, months of it, to protect his happiness. While he had been so busy proving himself, climbing social ladders, accumulating wealth and status, his mother had been suffering in silence 20 feet away from his bedroom. "How long?" he asked again, this time looking at Helen. Since last summer," Helen managed. At first it was just words. Then, she gestured helplessly at her bruised wrists. Vincent felt something crack inside his chest. "Last summer, 8 months. 8 months of his mother living in fear while he planned a wedding, celebrated deal closures, congratulated himself on his success." He turned back to Olivia, and what he saw in her face now was contempt. She had realized her performance wasn't working, and she had abandoned pretense. "Your mother is a burden, Vincent." "An embarrassment. Do you know what people say? Montgomery's mother is a former seamstress from Dorchester. That's what they say at the club at events. You've worked so hard to build yourself into something respectable, and she undermines it just by existing in your life." The words were so cruel, so calculated, that for a moment Vincent couldn't even process them. This was the woman he had thought he loved, the woman he had given his grandmother's ring, the woman he had planned to build a life with, and she was a complete stranger, worse than a stranger, a monster. "Get out," Vincent said quietly. "Vincent, be reasonable." "Get out!" The shout seemed to surprise them all, including Vincent himself. He never raised his voice, but he was vibrating with fury now, barely containing it. "Get out of my home, get away from my mother, and get out of my life. We're done. The engagement is over. The wedding is cancelled. You have until morning to remove your belongings from my house, or I will have them boxed and sent to your parents." Olivia's face transformed into something ugly. "You're making a huge mistake. My family has connections you can't even imagine. I can destroy your reputation, your business." "Try it," Vincent said, his voice cold and flat. I have 8 billion reasons why that won't work, and more importantly, I don't care anymore. I've spent 2.5 years trying to be worthy of people like you, trying to erase where I came from, trying to forget that my mother worked herself to the bone, so I could have opportunities. You've just reminded me what actually matters. So go ahead, tell your friends at the club, tell the social register, tell whoever you want. I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not. He pulled his phone from his pocket. I'm calling my lawyer. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to be gone, or I'll have security remove you. And if you ever come near my mother again, I will use every resource I have to destroy you. Do you understand me? Olivia stared at him for a long moment, perhaps realizing for the first time that she had miscalculated badly. Vincent Montgomery might have wanted social acceptance, but he was still that kid from Dorchester underneath, and she had just threatened the only person who truly mattered to him. She left without another word, her heels clicking angrily across the courtyard stones. Vincent heard the Audi start and roar away, and only then did he allow himself to sink into the chair beside his mother. I'm sorry, Helen whispered. I'm so sorry. I should have told you. No, Vincent said firmly, taking her hands carefully, mindful of the bruises. No, Mom. This is not your fault, this is my fault. I was so busy trying to impress people who don't matter, that I didn't see what was happening to the person who matters most. I failed you. I'm so sorry. They sat together in silence for a long time. Helen's tears eventually subsiding, Vincent's guilt settling into a heavy determination. Finally, he helped her to her bedroom, made her tea the way she used to make it for him when he was young, and stayed with her until she fell into an exhausted sleep. Then, Vincent went back to the main house and started making calls. His lawyer first, to ensure Olivia would be legally barred from contacting Helen or entering his properties. His doctor second, to arrange a private examination for Helen in the morning. His security company third, to change all access codes and install cameras around the carriage house. But as he sat in his study at 3 a.m. staring at the photo of his mother at his college graduation, her face beaming with pride, Vincent realized that practical measures weren't enough. Something had broken in him tonight. Or perhaps something had finally become clear that should have been obvious all along. He had spent 15 years building wealth and chasing status, measuring success by the wrong metrics entirely. He had almost married a woman who represented everything he thought he wanted. Old money, social connections, acceptance into circles that his mother could never enter. And in pursuing that false dream, he had betrayed the person who had actually sacrificed everything for him. Vincent made a decision in those quiet pre-dawn hours. He would sell his townhouse. Olivia had touched everything in it, picked out furniture, planned parties there. He and Helen would move somewhere new, somewhere without those memories. He would cut ties with the social circles that had always made him feel like an outsider anyway. Stop chasing acceptance from people whose approval wasn't worth having. But more than that, he would finally honor what his mother had taught him through her actions, that real worth comes not from what you accumulate, or who accepts you, but from how you treat others, especially those who depend on you. In the following weeks, Vincent did exactly that. He bought a house in Cambridge, near the river, with a guest wing for Helen that felt like a real home, not a converted carriage house. He canceled the wedding, losing substantial deposits, but not caring at all. When questioned by social acquaintances, he told them simply that he had discovered Olivia wasn't who he thought she was, and that protecting his mother was his only concern. Some understood, others whispered. Vincent found he didn't care about the whispers anymore. He arranged for a therapist to work with Helen, someone who specialized in elder abuse. The sessions were difficult. Helen had so much shame, so much undeserved guilt. But slowly, gradually, she began to heal. Vincent drastically reduced his work hours, delegating more to his partners, spending evenings with Helen instead of at networking events. They cooked together, walked along the Charles River, slowly rebuilt the close relationship they'd had before Vincent had become so consumed with proving himself. One evening, about 4 months after Olivia's expulsion, Helen brought up something that had been weighing on her. I've been thinking, she said carefully. About how many other older people might be going through what I went through. People who don't have a son who found out in time. Vincent had been thinking about the same thing. His research had revealed horrifying statistics about elder abuse. 1 in 10 Americans over 65 experienced some form of abuse. Most often from family members or romantic partners, and like Helen, most suffered in silence, too ashamed or afraid to speak up. But Vincent didn't want to build another institution, another foundation, with his name on it. He'd spent enough time building monuments to his own ego. Instead, he did something simpler and more direct. He used his financial expertise to help. He partnered with existing elder advocacy organizations, providing significant funding but also his professional skills. He helped them set up endowments so they wouldn't be dependent on yearly donations. He used his Wall Street connections to recruit other financial professionals to volunteer their expertise, helping elderly people who had been financially exploited, reviewing guardianship arrangements to prevent abuse, providing free financial planning for vulnerable seniors. He leveraged his media contacts to place stories about elder abuse in major publications, always featuring the voices of survivors rather than centering himself. He quietly funded investigative journalism into nursing homes and assisted living facilities with abuse complaints. He used his wealth strategically, like the financial instrument it was, to create leverage for change without creating another institution bearing his name. Helen, as she healed, found her own way to help. She started a small, informal support group that met at their house, other survivors of elder abuse, sharing their stories, supporting each other. Vincent would make coffee and set out pastries, then make himself scarce, letting them have their space. Helen's group grew slowly but steadily, and Vincent watched his mother find purpose and healing in helping others. It was at one of these support group meetings that Vincent first met Sophia Chen. She wasn't a member, she was a social worker who had brought one of her clients to the group. Vincent had answered the door, struck immediately by her warm presence and the gentle way she guided her elderly client into the house, making sure she felt comfortable before stepping back. After the meeting, as people were leaving, Vincent and Sophia ended up talking in the kitchen while he cleaned up. She was 37, a social worker specializing in elder advocacy, who had immigrated from Taiwan with her family when she was 8. She spoke passionately about the gaps in the system, the clients who fell through cracks, the cultural barriers that made reporting abuse even harder for immigrants. She didn't know who Vincent was, didn't recognize him from business news or society pages, and treated him like a regular person whose mother hosted a support group. Vincent found himself drawn to her authenticity, her genuine commitment to her work, the way she talked about her clients with such respect and compassion. But he was wary now, cautious in a way he'd never been before. He'd been so wrong about Olivia that he didn't trust his own judgment anymore. Over the following months, Vincent and Sophia kept running into each other, at advocacy events, at the support group meetings, at community centers where they both volunteered. Their friendship developed slowly, organically, with none of the performed romance of his relationship with Olivia. They talked about real things, family, values, the work they both cared about. Sophia met Helen numerous times before she ever went on a date with Vincent, and the respect and genuine affection between them was obvious. Helen watched carefully, not wanting to push but hopeful in a way she'd been afraid to feel after Olivia. She saw how Sophia treated everyone the same, whether they were wealthy donors or clients struggling with poverty, elderly people or young volunteers. She saw how Sophia listened to Helen's stories about immigrating from Ireland, how she asked questions and remembered details, how she valued Helen's experiences rather than dismissing them. Nearly a year after Olivia's expulsion, Vincent finally asked Sophia on an actual date. They went to a small Italian restaurant in the North End. Nothing fancy, just good food and conversation. That dinner stretched into 4 hours of talking, and when Vincent walked Sophia home, she kissed him goodnight on the cheek and told him she'd been wondering if he was ever going to ask. Their relationship was nothing like what Vincent had with Olivia. Sophia didn't care about his wealth or his connections. She drove a 10-year-old Honda, bought her clothes at Target, and was perfectly happy with picnics in the park rather than expensive restaurants. What she valued was authenticity, kindness, shared purpose. She made Vincent laugh in a way he hadn't in years, challenged his assumptions, called him out when he fell back into old patterns of measuring worth by money. Helen watched her son fall in love again, genuinely this time, and felt only joy. She got to know Sophia through dinners at the house, walks in the neighborhood, volunteering together, when Sophia occasionally joined them for Mass. Helen noticed how naturally she fit, how she seemed to genuinely enjoy their company rather than tolerating it for Vincent's sake. One Sunday afternoon, about 18 months after Olivia had been expelled from their lives, Vincent found his mother in the garden behind their Cambridge house. He sat beside her on the bench, watching her tend to the herbs she had planted. After a comfortable silence, he told Helen that he was thinking about asking Sophia to marry him. He wanted to know what his mother thought, if she had any concerns. Helen set down her garden trowel and looked at her son with those clear blue-gray eyes. "Sophia is everything that woman wasn't," she said simply. "She's kind, she's genuine, she values what matters, and most importantly, she loves you for who you actually are, not for what you can provide or what doors you can open." She paused, then added, "But Vincent, are you ready? Are you marrying her because you love her, or because she's different from Olivia?" It was exactly the kind of direct question his mother would ask, and Vincent had to sit with it for a moment. "I love her," he said finally. "I love how she makes me want to be better. I love that she doesn't care about any of the things I used to think mattered. I love that she makes you laugh. I love that she's teaching me what actually matters in life." Helen smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. "Then you have my blessing. But Vincent, don't give her your grandmother's ring. That ring has bad associations now. Get Sophia her own ring. Start fresh, without any connections to that woman." Vincent hadn't even thought of that, but his mother was absolutely right. He commissioned a new ring, working with a local jeweler, something that would be uniquely Sophia's. He proposed on a quiet evening at the house, with Helen's blessing, with none of the performance or spectacle of his first engagement. Just two people who had found something real in each other, built on honesty and shared values. Sophia said yes through happy tears, and they celebrated with Helen over Chinese takeout in the kitchen, exactly the way they all preferred. The wedding, when it happened, was nothing like what Vincent had planned with Olivia. It was held at a small church in Dorchester, the same church where Vincent had his first communion, where Helen still sometimes went to Mass. There were 60 people, real friends, family, social work colleagues, members of Helen's support group. No society columnists, no strategic guest list, no performance of status. Just people who actually mattered, celebrating something genuine. Vincent's vows made everyone cry because they were so honest. He talked about how Sophia had taught him the difference between image and substance, between performance and authenticity. He thanked her for loving not just him, but his mother, for understanding where he came from, rather than wanting him to forget it. He promised to spend their life together, focused on what actually mattered, rather than what merely appeared impressive. Sophia and Vincent built a life that bore no resemblance to what Vincent had once imagined for himself. They lived modestly, well, modestly for someone worth hundreds of millions. They gave away most of Vincent's income, living on what Sophia earned as a social worker, plus a comfortable but not extravagant allowance from his investments. They spent their time volunteering, supporting causes they believed in, being present for Helen as she aged. Vincent had drastically reduced his role at the firm, becoming a limited partner who advised but didn't run day-to-day operations. He found he was actually better at his work when he wasn't obsessed with it, when he had other things in his life that mattered more. His investments performed better when he wasn't driven by ego or competition, but by clear-headed analysis. Helen's support group continued to grow, eventually spawning similar groups across the Boston area. She became a quiet advocate for elder abuse prevention, speaking occasionally at community centers, always emphasizing that abuse could happen to anyone, in any family, at any income level. Her story, shared carefully with Vincent's support, helped other elderly people find the courage to speak up. Years passed peacefully. Vincent and Sophia adopted 2 children, filling their house with the noise and chaos and joy of family life. Helen became a grandmother in practice, if not biology, doting on the kids, teaching them Irish songs, telling them stories about their father's childhood. She lived to see both children graduate from elementary school, and when she passed away peacefully in her sleep at 79, it was in the house she shared with family who loved her, surrounded by photos and memories of a life that had started hard but ended well. Vincent grieved deeply, but found comfort in the life they had built together. A life defined by genuine connection, rather than hollow status, by substance rather than performance. At Helen's funeral, he gave a eulogy that was honest about everything, including his failure to protect her when she needed it most, his blindness to Olivia's cruelty, his eventual awakening to what actually mattered. "My mother taught me everything important," Vincent said to the packed church. "She taught me through her example that real strength is quiet sacrifice, that true wealth is loving relationships, that authentic success is measured by how you treat others, especially when no one is watching. And then, through her suffering at my fiancé's hands, she taught me one final lesson, that it's never too late to open your eyes, to see what you've been missing, to choose substance over image." He paused, looking at Sophia in the front row, their children beside her. "I spent years chasing the wrong things, measuring myself by the wrong metrics. My mother's abuse and my eventual discovery of it shattered my illusions and gave me the chance to build something real. I hate that she suffered. I hate that I failed to see it. But I'm grateful, and I know she was too, that I finally woke up, that we got those final years together, that I got to thank her properly for everything she gave me." The years continued. Vincent and Sophia grew old together, their children grew up. Helen's support group legacy continued, in communities across Massachusetts. Vincent never forgot the lesson he had learned, that the people we love deserve our attention and protection, not just our money. That social status and acceptance from the right people mean nothing compared to genuine connection. But it's never too late to reject false values and build something real. The Cambridge house remained warm and full of life, a place where people gathered who actually cared about each other, where wealth was a tool for good rather than a measure of worth, where an immigrant seamstress's legacy of love and sacrifice was honored every single day. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, Vincent would sit in the garden Helen had planted, thinking about the journey that had brought him here, the success and blindness, the betrayal and awakening, the loss and rebuilding. He would think about Olivia sometimes, not with anger but with a kind of distant pity. She had taught him what he didn't want, had stripped away his delusions, had inadvertently given him the gift of seeing clearly. But mostly he thought about his mother, about her strength and her suffering, about her love that had endured even when he hadn't deserved it, about the life lessons she had taught through both her daily example and her final ordeal. She had wanted him to be successful, but she had wanted even more for him to be good, to be genuine, to value what actually mattered. And in the end, he had learned. It had taken a terrible wake-up call, and he would always carry guilt for not seeing sooner. But he had learned, and he had built a life on the right foundation. Not image, but substance. Not status, but service. Not performance, but authenticity. Vincent Montgomery had chased the wrong dream and nearly lost everything that mattered. But his mother's suffering had opened his eyes, and he had spent the rest of his life honoring her sacrifice by finally understanding what she had always known, that real wealth is love, real success is integrity, and real status comes from how you treat those who can do nothing for you in return. The Cambridge house became a gathering place for people who had learned similar lessons. Every Sunday, after the support group meetings ended, people would linger sharing meals, telling stories, finding community in their shared experiences and values. Vincent and Sophia's children grew up surrounded by elderly people who had survived abuse, social workers who dedicated their lives to service, immigrants who had built new lives through sacrifice, people who measured worth by character rather than bank accounts. Their daughter Elena decided in high school that she wanted to become a social worker like Sophia. Their son James showed an aptitude for finance like Vincent but with a completely different orientation. He wanted to use those skills to help nonprofits and protect vulnerable people from financial exploitation. Vincent and Sophia watched their children develop into exactly the kind of people Helen would have been proud of, and they knew that was the real measure of a life well lived. On the 10th anniversary of Helen's death, the family gathered at her grave in the Irish section of the cemetery. Vincent stood there with Sophia, their now adult children, and realized that a decade had passed since his mother's death. But her influence had only grown stronger. She had shaped not just him but everyone he touched. His wife, his children, the people who came through their home, the clients Sophia served, the causes they supported. "I used to think success was about building something with my name on it," Vincent said to Sophia as they walked back to the car. "A firm, a foundation, a legacy. But Mom's legacy isn't a building or an institution, it's in how we live, what we value, who we help. That's so much more powerful than anything with my name carved in stone." Sophia squeezed his hand. "Your mother was remarkable precisely because she never needed recognition. She gave everything and asked for nothing. That's a kind of strength most people never achieve." Vincent thought about that often in the years that followed. The world kept spinning, measuring success in all the wrong ways. Forbes lists, social media followers, square footage, designer label, and there were still Vincent Montgomerys out there, chasing acceptance from people who didn't matter, missing what was happening right in front of them, making the same mistakes he had made. He couldn't fix that systemic problem, couldn't change a whole culture's warped values. But he could tell his story when asked, could support organizations doing the real work, could model a different way of living, could raise children who understood what actually mattered. That felt like enough, like the best way to honor Helen's memory, and the lesson her suffering had taught him. As Vincent moved through his 50s and into his 60s, he found himself thinking less about Olivia. She had become a cautionary tale, a symbol of who he used to be and what he used to value, and more about all the small moments with his mother he had missed while chasing the wrong things. The mornings they could have shared coffee, the conversations they could have had, the time he could never get back. But he also held on to the good years they'd had after his awakening. The Sunday dinners, the walks by the river, the quiet companionship of simply being together without agenda or performance. Those years had been a gift, both to Helen and to him. She had gotten to see him finally become the man she raised him to be, not the hollow success he had been performing. And he had gotten to truly know his mother as an adult, to hear her stories, to learn from her wisdom, to tell her every day that he loved her and was grateful. One evening, as Vincent approached 70 himself, his daughter Elena called. She had just helped a client escape an abusive situation with her adult daughter, and the client's son, a successful executive, had been completely blindsided, having no idea his mother was suffering. "It made me think of Grandma Helen," Elena said. "And how easily that could have been you, if you hadn't come home early that day. Dad, do you ever think about how different life would have been if you'd married Olivia? If you'd never found out?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "I think about it all the time," he finally said. "I would have married her. Mom would have been moved to some facility where Olivia could have continued the abuse, or maybe the isolation would have killed her spirit even if there was no physical abuse. I would have lived in that Beacon Hill townhouse, gone to the right parties, had the right friends, measured my life by all the wrong metrics. I would have been successful and miserable and wouldn't have even known it." He paused. "That one moment, coming home early, hearing Mom's voice, seeing what I saw, that changed everything. It shattered my illusions. Yes, but it also freed me. It gave me the chance to build something real, instead of something performative. I hate that Mom had to suffer for me to wake up, but I'm grateful every single day that I did wake up, that I got those final years with her, that I got to build this life with your mother, that I got to raise you and James with the right values." Do you think Olivia ever thinks about what she did? Elena asked. I doubt it, Vincent said. People like her don't tend towards self-reflection. She probably tells a story where she's the victim, where she was mistreated by my crazy mother and I was too weak to see it. That's how abusers operate. They rewrite history to absolve themselves. I hope she never hurt anyone else the way she hurt Grandma. Me too, Vincent said softly. But the sad reality is, she probably did. That's why your work matters so much, Elena. Every client you help, every person you believe, when they find the courage to speak up, that's preventing the next Helen. That's the real work. After they hung up, Vincent sat in the garden. Helen had designed, now maintained by Sophia with the same love. Helen had shown. He thought about how strange life was, how a single moment could pivot everything, how suffering could paradoxically be the catalyst for transformation. He thought about all the men like his former self, chasing status and acceptance, so busy performing success that they missed what was actually happening in their own homes. He thought about all the Helens, suffering in silence to protect their children's happiness. He thought about all the Olivias using charm and beauty as weapons, targeting vulnerable people who couldn't fight back. And he thought about how hard it was to see clearly when you were blinded by your own desires and insecurities. How easy it was to be complicit in cruelty through simple inattention. How much courage it took to shatter your own illusions and build something new from the ruins. Vincent had been given a brutal gift, the forced awakening, the clear sight, the second chance. Not everyone got that. Some people married their Olivias and never discovered the truth. Some elderly people suffered in silence until death. Some families fractured beyond repair. He had been lucky in the most terrible way. Lucky that he came home early. Lucky that he saw what he saw. Lucky that Helen survived long enough for them to rebuild. Lucky that Sophia existed and was patient enough to love a man learning to be authentic for the first time in his adult life. As the sun set over Cambridge, painting the garden in shades of gold and amber, Vincent made a promise to his mother's memory, to never forget, to never become complacent, to always choose substance over image, authenticity over performance, love over status, to use his remaining years to be worthy of the sacrifices she had made and the lessons she had taught. The story of Vincent Montgomery and his mother Helen didn't end with Helen's death. It continued through the lives they had touched, the values they had modeled, the example they had set. It lived on in Elena's client, who found the courage to escape, in James's work protecting vulnerable people's finances, in the countless members of support groups who found healing through sharing their stories. It lived on in the choice Vincent made every single day to see clearly, to value what actually mattered, to protect those who needed protection, to build relationships based on genuine connection rather than strategic advantage, to be, finally, the man his mother had always believed he could be. Not the man society had told him he should be. That was Helen's real legacy. Not just survival, not just sacrifice, but the transformation of her son, from someone performing success to someone actually living it, from someone blind to someone who finally learned to see, from someone chasing acceptance to someone who found authenticity. And on quiet evenings, when the house was still and the garden peaceful, Vincent would sometimes swear he could feel her presence, not haunting, but blessing. A gentle reminder that he had learned the lesson, that he had changed his course, that he was finally honoring everything she had given him. The work would continue. The values would be passed down. The story would be told and retold. A cautionary tale, yes, but also a story of redemption, of awakening, of choosing to become better, even when it meant admitting how wrong you had been. Vincent Montgomery had failed his mother when she needed him most. But he had also saved her, learned from her, honored her sacrifice by completely remaking his understanding of success and worth. And in the end, that was all any of us could do. Learn from our failures, grow from our pain, and build something meaningful from the broken pieces of our illusions. The Cambridge house stood as testament to that truth. Not a showplace, but a home. Not a trophy, but a sanctuary. Not a performance, but a life actually lived, with all its mess and beauty, and genuine human connection. That was the real inheritance Helen had left. Not money or status, but the example of how to live with integrity, how to love without condition, how to sacrifice without resentment, how to endure suffering without becoming bitter. And Vincent had finally learned to accept that inheritance, to carry it forward, to pass it on. That was enough. That was everything. That was what his mother had always wanted for him. And in the end, despite all his mistakes and blindness, he had given her that gift, not wealth or social status, but the knowledge that her son had finally understood what truly mattered. And in that understanding, Helen Montgomery's life, a seamstress from Dorchester, who never had wealth or fame or recognition, had created ripples of impact that would extend far beyond her years, touching lives she would never meet, inspiring choices she would never see, building a legacy that had nothing to do with money or monuments, and everything to do with love, sacrifice, and the quiet dignity of choosing substance over show. That was the story Vincent would tell his grandchildren someday. Not about his business success or his wealth, but about the woman who had worked until her hands bled to give him opportunities, who had endured abuse to protect his happiness, who had taught him through both her life and her suffering what actually mattered in this world. And they would learn, as he had learned, that real success isn't measured in dollars or social standing, or magazine profiles. It's measured in integrity, in kindness, in how you treat those who depend on you, in whether you have the courage to shatter your own illusions and build something genuine from the ruins. Vincent Montgomery had learned that lesson the hard way, but he had learned it, and that made all the difference. Every story carries within it an echo of our shared humanity. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone special. Leave us a comment about what you felt, and subscribe to join us for more soul-reaching stories. Because every life tells a story that deserves to be heard. See you next time.